it's not lost on anybody that James is, in the middle of China saying what he said with Daryl Morey's, sordid, complicated background with supporting Hong Kong and the NBA losing a lot of money because China got upset. So for James to say what he said about Daryl in China is a whole different layer to it. But it's obviously a pretty nasty dynamic here.
I mean, drama filled. I was telling Deuce how, I love drama so much, especially when it's not associated with the team that I cover and everything as well. But there's also this side of me, the human side of me that's like, or even, I guess not even the human side, the NBA like fan side of me that's like, I just want the best for these players. I want to see their talent on the floor, and I don't want to see all this crap keep them off the floor. So how do you think this one plays out with Harden and the Sixers?
I don't know. It feels like it might be headed toward unprecedented territory, meaning a lot of Ben Simmons comparisons, right? Myself included in the story I wrote to the parallel between what the Sixers had a couple years ago with Ben. The obvious difference, excuse me, is that James got 1 year left on his contract. Ben had 3, 4, I forget what it was. That's a major difference. So from a leverage standpoint, this is like you could teach a college course on like analyzing the leverage here, because James is an athlete who at 33 years old has got to pay attention to father time, conceivably still wants to win a championship. That clock is ticking. The idea of burning a season out of spite for the team that you play for doesn't make a lot of logical sense. So if you're Daryl Morey, you kind of count on that. Like there's no way he's just not going to play. On the flip side, I look at Daryl. I told somebody yesterday, Father Time is pretty friendly to front office people. Like Daryl, worst case scenario, this thing could cost him his career in Philly. He's still going to land somewhere else, make a lot of money. Those types of things are part of the calculus. And I think, to answer your question, Morgan, I don't know where it's going, but it's, James seems extremely dug in. There's CBA considerations to be, contextualized here and mentioned here, is that if he doesn't provide 30 days of service, at any given point, free agency will not be waiting for him in the summertime. If he doesn't play, he's not going to become a free agent. We have not seen that before. That wouldn't benefit Philly. And I'm admittedly kind of quoting our colleague and mutual friend, Bobby Marks of ESPN here, who had a good breakdown yesterday on it. That stuff matters a lot. If I had to like pick one of the scenarios to handicap and say, this is where it goes, I have to imagine that, I don't know the timing, but that they find a way to get a deal done with the Clippers, because Philly cannot afford for Joel Embiid to be asking out, anytime in the next couple of months. And, I don't know, I don't want to highlight this if it's not factual, but did you guys notice this was making the rounds yesterday that Joel had taken Philly off of his Twitter handle? We all know in this day and age, like that kind of stuff does actually matter. So, they got to find a solution here.
Yeah, that's where I was going next. The Embiid factor has to loom large, right? He's been through a lot in his time with Philly. There's just no way, if you're the Sixers, you can walk into this season with uncertainty when it comes to James Harden. You're trying to win a championship, one, right? And you're trying to maximize the years that Embiid has left at a prime level. He's coming off an MVP year. You're trying to win a championship. If you walk into the season with a Ben Simmons-like situation, you have to imagine Embiid's like, I don't want any part of this.
I would imagine that too. And I can tell you, last month before we jumped out on vacation, I wrote a bit about, those comments that Joel had made in that one conference where he alluded to the idea that he wanted to win a title, whether it was in Philly or somewhere else. So I write this column on Joel's comments, try to add a little substance to it. And honestly, it was one of those stories where I always kind of enjoy this, where you think you hit the mark and then the phone rings a couple times after the column comes out and you end up learning a little bit more. And really, admittedly, some of the pushback I got within the league on that column was that, okay, you mentioned that Joel for years has talked in Philly about wanting to be like Kobe, wanting to be like Dirk, Tim Duncan, the guys that stayed with their one team the entire time. That is something Joel has cared about in the past and probably still does to this day. But the consistent pushback I got was like, you went too broad with the scope of your context, because in the here and the now, around the league, it's very much like people are going, all right, it's just a matter of time until Joel asks out, that he's pretty frustrated, and we'll see if that bears out. But if you're Daryl again and the Sixers, I don't know. Either one of these scenarios might still lead to Joel being unhappy. You know, you do a deal with the Clippers where he looks at what you get in return and doesn't feel like he's in a better position to contend than he was last season. You know, he might be unhappy there. Or, of course, if James is MIA and you're getting nothing for a guy that was pretty darn good last season. So they're in, a pretty tricky spot.
Yeah. I feel like anytime it's with a guy to James Harden's caliber, like that tier of player, it ends up being tricky, right? Because of the star power, because of the money involved, because of the aging star. I mean, there's so many elements to it. But you mentioned the Clippers, and we already kind of know about their interests. But what is James Harden's market around the league?
I think it's pretty slim. I truthfully can't even spotlight one other team that is like waiting with bated breath to get him. Now, part of that is because the players are, you know, in a situation like this, they are going to kind of frame their own storyline, so to speak. And he is the one who has made it clear that the Clippers where he wants to be. If that changed and they sent the word that he's open to other possibilities, then maybe, you know, teams look at it. But you're talking about him being a rental, which is a major factor. You're not, you know, it's not a Ben Simmons situation where you're going to get the guy for a handful of years. And then obviously he's a lot older than Ben. You're also talking about a guy that, you know, despite his many accomplishments and his Hall of Fame resume, continues to be dogged by questions of passion for the game and competitiveness and teammate type stuff. Fair or not, you know, this morning I'm scrolling through, you know, my Twitter feed, and Kevin McHale is just absolutely going in on James Harden on Sirius XM radio, his former coach in Houston, and calling him out for, you know, back in the day when they'd have 3-on-2 breaks. And he says, when you look up and your teammate stops running and now it's a 2-on-2, you know, that affects everybody. And, you know, you got to remember, Kevin, you know, you always kind of wonder about politics and relationships here. You know, I'm sure Daryl has some people and friends in the league kind of in terms of messaging helping him right now. And who knows if that's the case with Kevin, but those questions linger for teams that might look at him. And, you know, again, it's a small market, and we'll see if he can get where he wants to go.